My presentation will consider the use of GM crops and the topic of agribusiness overall with regard to the tragedy of the commons. The tragedy of the commons, written by Garrett Hardin, is used to illustrate how a shared resource can be exploited by one individual of a group, with only incrementally incurred negative consequences for each of the remaining individuals. For instance, if a community shares a field and each farmer has a dozen cattle, if one farmer has an extra cow, the additional damage to the field is shared, and so has little consequence for each other farmer. However, if every farmer decides to bring just one extra cow, the small consequences for each other farmer are accumulatively great and overall terrible for the group. Garrett Hardin explains the motive as follows. As a rational being, each herdsman seeks to maximise his gain. Explicitly or implicitly, more or less consciously, he asks, what is the utility to me of adding one more animal to my herd? This utility has one negative and one positive component. The positive component is a function of the increment of one animal. Since the herdsman receives all the proceeds from the sale of the additional animal, the positive utility is nearly +1. The negative component is a function of the additional overgrazing created by one more animal. Since, however, the effects of overgrazing are shared by the herdsman, the negative utility for any particular decision-making herdsman is only a fraction of -1. These sentiments were also outlined prior to Hardin by Aristotle, when he said, "That which is common to the greatest number has the least care bestowed upon it. Everyone thinks chiefly of his own, hardly at all of the common interest, and only when he is himself concerned as an individual. For besides other considerations, everybody is more inclined to neglect the duty which he expects another to fulfil." Today's farming techniques can be crudely broken into 3 basic known groups, and I will quickly outline a few characteristics of each method. The 3 groups are organic farming, standard farming, and GM farming. Organic farming is the planting of bodyguard-type plants so they will naturally protect crops from certain insects. Organic farms also use pesticides, but these are naturally found pesticides. There's also a rotation of crops on the land to encourage more nutrient-rich soil. Standard farming is the use of herbicides and growth-aiding formulas that are man-made, which have been used for many years but are not ideal for the environment. Additionally, farmers often grow single-type crops only, without rotation, which is not good for the soil. GM farming is a considerably new method which uses the technique of genetically manipulating plants so they respond to specific ways to certain environments and chemicals. The main incentive to use GM crops was that they were, and to some still are, considered a significant part of the Green Revolution, whereby many may be fed with less labour and less resources. One example of this attribute was demonstrated by Norman Borlaug. Borlaug worked as a director of a wheat programme in Mexico. He said that he thought he had initially made a dreadful mistake in accepting the position. However, in contrast, it turned out to be a great success. While attempting to aid people in Mexico, he developed a high-yield, low-pesticide dwarf wheat, which in turn is now depended upon by a substantial proportion of the world's population, thereby fulfilling the Green Revolution sentiments. The GM crops he believed were necessary for human survival, and so this is a common argument and defence for their use. Wide-held concern is that though human manipulation of characteristics of plants has been around for centuries, the difference with genetically modified crops is that traditional processes are slower, and in some instances the manipulation possible with GMOs would not be possible at all with traditional methods. These are called transgenic. Subsequently, the fragile balance of wildlife is affected, though it is not yet clear in how many ways and to what effect wide use of GM crops may be. A major resistance to GM crops is due to the much disliked company Monsanto, which sells the famous Roundup Ready seeds. They are also well known for having created Agent Orange. These seeds have been made genetically resistant to the complementary good known as Roundup herbicide. This means farmers do not have to tillage the land to remove weeds, but simply use Roundup Ready seeds and then spray Roundup Ready herbicide over the crops. This will kill all weeds and many kinds of plants, leaving only the Roundup Ready crops to flourish. Though this aids return on harvest, as the farmers can ensure all the crops have the best chances to grow, something that is vital in the developing world, however, the implications on the land have been detrimental. The seeds and herbicide reduce the quality of the soil, meaning subsequent harvests are then not so successful, and without cover crops or intervention to protect the quality of the soil, there is a continual decline. After a number of harvests, the weeds that once would have been destroyed by the herbicide can also become resistant due to repeat exposure. When crops are successful, there is also the risk of outcrossing, which has occurred in the US. An additional side effect is the pollution of water and the subsequent deaths of water-dwelling life, for instance in paddy fields, the death of insects, fish and toads. In other crop fields, the pollution can end up in neighbouring streams and ponds. GM seeds are often advocated for their mass hunger resolving capacity, but in reality, due to the scientific developments that need to be funded to happen, presently the GM crops only really benefit those agribusinesses that have enough money to fund the research and development. This behaviour is exploiting the planet, with GM crops provided for those who are already secure with regards to food. Additionally, much of the research and development of GMOs has lately been redirected towards biofuels. Nina Fedorov, Professor of Biology at Pennsylvania State University, said, "Environmentally benign crop protection strategies are used almost exclusively for megacrops that are profitable for biotech companies." This means that even though seeds requiring less water and being robust to withstand droughts and submersion, for instance, would be extremely beneficial for the global south, there is instead a prioritising of fuel over food in the GM industry, and so this seems to be a prioritisation of money and convenience over the lives of many people. If the world environment is a commons, then elite companies are exploiting shared resources at a small cost to every person on the planet overall. However, this is evidently unfair as no one else benefits, and due to privatisation, not everyone can do the same. Developments in seed technology are awarded patents. This is a means of enabling states to ensure that innovative methods and products become public knowledge and they are applied within a country. They are protected by what is referred to as intellectual property rights. Hardin argued for privatisation so the commons would not be exploited, and so in the world of genetically modified crops, IPRs are the restriction of exploitation. If, for instance, a farmer using GM crops sells cuttings or home-germinated seeds to a neighbouring farmer, IPR owners such as Monsanto can identify these crops and in turn sue the latter farmer for effectively handling stolen property. This is why, even if all countries were happy to use them, they are not used widely as they come at a price. So this instance is protecting exploitation of the commons, but it is aiding exploitation of people and their shared planet. The initially hoped technological solution is appearing to be just as hard and predicted, and that it is no real solution at all. The private gain exceeds the share of the common loss, but this condition is not indefinitely possible to maintain. Another aspect of GMOs are their use for medicine. In the 1990s, a quarter of insulin and cancer treatments were produced by GMOs. Farming has been used to advance medicines, and gene therapy has reduced the time and labour to produce pharmaceuticals. Because of numerous developments in medicine such as this, the world population is not only expanding, but existing people are living longer. As Malthus illustrated, our population grows geometrically, meaning it grows larger and quicker than the means to grow crops. As he was speaking at a time when biotechnology like GMOs didn't exist, one could argue that this is no longer quite so true. However, in keeping with his sentiment, it is true that we are still unable to think of the environment as being infinite in its resources for humans long term, with an ever-increasing world population. Hardin said, "A finite world can support only a finite population." Humans are optimistic as a species. This has been confirmed in recent research to be a major contributing factor to their considerable denial of clearly negative repercussions, such as cancer from smoking, heart attacks and diabetes due to bad diet, and general health problems when drinking. So when Hardin said natural selection favours the forces of psychological denial, he was very apt, though he struggles to solve how we might control or make the resources of the planet more meritocratic. Instead, he suggests that breeders, also known as parents and potential parents, ought to be controlled. In a natural state where the birth of too many children would mean the weakest succumbing to starvation due to limited resources, then the consequences would be, as he puts it, its own punishment to the germline. However, in somewhere such as the UK, these children are also the responsibility of the state. And so if a parent doesn't have the money to afford the food, the child is sustained by others. If the UK were a commons and a breeder wished to have just one more child on welfare, then the child, like the extra cow in the commons, would only have an incremental cost to each other individual that pays taxes. People worldwide who do have a means to care for their children or just about survive will have them as it is in their nature and also a human right under the United Nations. Hardin criticises this as when people are left to decide whether to have children, few will consciously decide not to have children based on the environmental impact their breeding will have. Farming as an occupation has the highest suicide rates of any other occupation worldwide. Though there has been observations that this could be due to the easy access farmers often have to poisonous substances and rifles, it is clearly an indication that they are suffering, and due to the high competition, even in the UK, where farmers are increasingly having to put a strain on themselves, their cattle and crops, in order to meet the supermarkets' ever-demanding low-price demands. They must make what they have work harder. Unlike the situation outlined by Hardin, the people who run the supermarkets are trying to make individual advances at the expense of others who share in the commons of the agricultural industry. Due to these sorts of pressures, one can understand why wide use of genetically modified crops would be appealing. Fortunately, in the UK, there is a strong public and government resistance to GM products, as it is presently economically beneficial not to use them due to the profitable organic farming industry. Though this may not continue so strongly, as modern organic farming techniques can be more damaging to the environment than standard farming, a factor if widely known may affect its popularity. To conclude, it seems that the commons of the environment and agribusinesses overall are utilised by individuals to survive and to procreate, but such a topic, with its multifaceted ethical dilemmas, can make one wonder if trying to solve world hunger and the devastations of the environment is not just more easily resolved by believing Hardin's view that freedom to breed is intolerable.